Good morning, Jose. Let me know if you can hear me okay.
Yeah, I can hear you, teacher. Good morning.
Good morning. If you want to go ahead and share your screen, go right ahead, get your PowerPoint set up, and if you want to go and turn your webcam on also.
Okay. Can you see the screen?
Yes.
So we are going to wait for Sophie.
Yeah, we can wait here a few more minutes. We'll start right at 8 o'clock. Hopefully she can join us. I just sent her a message, so we'll see if she'll be joining us.
Okay.
Here momentarily. I'm going to leave notes. I don't know if you've had a chance to see any of the other presentations, but I'm leaving notes. I'll give you some feedback, of course, today verbally, but I'm also going to take notes in it's called the PLC notebook in Microsoft Teams. So when we finish, take a look at that as well if you have any questions, of course, but I'll be keeping notes there as I listen. And just check that if that's useful, if that's helpful.
Okay. Yes.
Let's see. Today is June 1st. Okay. Okay. Good morning, Sophia.
Hi, teacher. Good morning.
All right. I guess we can go ahead and start whenever you're ready, Jose.
Okay. Okay, so good morning. My name is Jose Jesus Lopez Nieto, and this is the oral defense for my thesis, The Use of Authentic Videos to Promote the Listening Skill in English Teaching. Okay, so to begin with, there we have the problem. Authentic material is Authentic material is an exposure and example to the real use of the everyday basis language and how native speakers use the language for their daily life purposes. Authentic material serves as an example of how the world uses the language and how the world develops in a real context. And since authentic material is not designed to English classrooms or language classrooms, authentic material can provide students with different perspectives and different examples on how the language is used all around the world. It is important for the students to be provided with different tools and different perceptions on how the language is working right now all around the world in different English speaking countries. It provides different contexts and different situations for the students to be aware on how this language is being used in a real context, not only in a classroom. The purpose of this research starts with listening. Listening is something vital in language learning, and this skill provides input for the students. For most of the students, listening is the first approach, and it can serve as a pillar for the students because it provides the necessary tools to continue carrying the learning process, not only at an earlier stages, but also all along of their learning journey throughout this new acquisition of the language. The purpose of this study is to discover the different perspectives and different expressions that exposing the students to real language in these earlier stages and later on in one of the most important stages of the learning, and to discover how this can affect their performance, their development, and also the carry out of the classes. As most authors says, listening is one of the most important stages in the listening process, in the learning process. Sorry. To begin with the literature review, we have authentic materials as teaching materials. We can find teaching materials as resources that help to facilitate the learning of a language. By taking this into consideration, we can agree that teaching materials are specifically designed to help students throughout their journey and throughout their path of learning a new language. Their duty is to provide the students with the easiest and simplest way of providing information. It is a tool that assists the teachers to give the best of them and to give the students a reliable and trustable um, part of the learning process. It is supposed to facilitate and it is supposed to guide the students to into a better acquisition of the language. Teaching materials is an important part of the language. It's basically the first contact that the student have with the language, and it is something that they can come back and go and come and go to restate what they have learned and to consolidate what they are trying to acquire day by day during their classes. Regarding authentic materials, the only thing that is important is that they are not created for educational language purposes. As I mentioned before in the problem of my thesis, authentic materials is not meant or it wasn't designed to be used in the classrooms. It was as the name says, they are authentic parts of the language. It is a social representation on how the language is being used. It has no educational objective, and that's what makes the authentic materials something real and a natural part of the language. Uh, by introducing the students into authentic materials as teaching materials, you are putting, or the teacher is putting, situations that are more likely to happen to the students if they travel or if they try to communicate with an English speaking person or a native speaking speaker, or if they try to have a normal conversation because it is part of the real language and it is something that allows the student to be part of these different situations, of these real situations, without taking them into further sacrifices as traveling to another country or having to interact with strictly native speakers. This authentic material provides the students the opportunity to be part of these social interactions without a big sacrifice. Authentic materials, as I said, is a social representation of native speakers. The students get the opportunity to interact with these native speakers and to analyze how they are using the language. It reflects the real part of the language as something that I can relate with learning a new language is that not always you get to use it as you learn it in school. This reflects the real part that it was meant to be and it was meant to use for communicative purposes. It's a more natural approach and they put you in situations that are out of your hand if you are not able to travel or if you don't have the privileges to do it. The next part of the literature review is videos for teaching purposes. With the origin of a new era at the beginning of the 21st century, the language competences changed and became visibly more focused on the sociocultural aspects of the language. The language evolved and it adapted to a new era that we have not only left behind, but we also are um, we are allowing the language to be used in these new stages of language teaching. it is giving the language teaching a social emphasis that it has never had before. In early stages of the language teaching, it was supposed to give you a perfect use of the language, a very correct, very professional, very um, how can I say it, a very formal way to use it. But right now, this new era and these new sociocultural aspects of the language is providing you with communicative situations that you never had before, and it's using material that didn't have an educational purpose, teaching purpose. It complements the atmosphere that the classes might have to create a real language, and it puts you in a context that the English language has naturally, and it submerges you into a more natural and more common way of communication. Videos establish a wide array of real-life language situations to learners that complements their learning atmosphere and provides context to the learning process. By using these videos for teaching purposes, you are giving a whole new atmosphere to the students. You are providing them with new tools to understand not only the formal way of speaking, but also the authentic way of speaking. You are providing them with new educational situations that are not only meant to be used while answering an exam, but also while trying to communicate with different native speakers in different English-speaking countries. To continue, the role of the listening skill in foreign languages. The listening skill is required to master since other skills correlate to listening as well. It is important to develop the listening skill before developing other skills. As I mentioned before, the listening is one of the first encounters that students have with the language. It is the first impression, and it is what establish the paths that the student is going to have all along their journey, their learning process, or their learning journey. The learning of a new language relies on listening. This skill also tends to take part as a primordial role during the acquisition process of the language. It is important to develop this listening skill before developing others, so you can have an idea of what you're dealing with while learning this new language. Mm, Developing listening skill by using authentic videos in teaching foreign languages as a final part of the literature review. Video materials have been recognized as valuable sources for intensive language study because they present a total communicative situation. Combining the problem and combining the purposes, we can get to the conclusion, or we can assume that these two parts take a big part of the learning process, and combining them only makes it bigger and only makes it more important to take into consideration while providing students with information and with material that help them to facilitate their learning process. By providing students with real languages in the earlier stages that mm, that are part of their significant stages of their learning, several studies have been done, and several studies have shown the positive outcomes on using authentic videos to promote the listening skill. By mentioning different example, we have the Heron in 1994, where two groups with the same teacher in charge used authentic and text-based material versus video-based material. In the outcome, the group with video-based materials surpassed the scores of the authentic text-based material, even though they both were authentic material. In the second study, we have Manico, as I did in Woody Punk, in which he had a listening skill He improved the listening skill to a higher level when using native speakers video programs during their classes. As a third study, we have Woody Pong that used authentic videos, and he took the scores on the listening skill before and after using them, and only to show that after using these authentic videos, their scores went up very, very drastically. Finally, we have Arono in 2014 with 89 students with video-based materials and 126 students with audio-based materials. In all of these studies, the groups who had or interacted with video-based materials got a higher level of listening skill in their scores. The research questions of this study is: what are the teachers' perceptions of the use of authentic videos? What is the role of the listening skill in the foreign language learning? And how do English language teaching use authentic videos to promote listening skill? For the method of this study and the participants that took part of this study was a 31-year-old female with more than 7 years of experience of teaching English as a second language. She graduated from the Universidad Autónoma de Aguascalientes in the BA of English Teaching. In the same participant scheme, we have a 24-year-old male with 2 years of experience in the language teaching. He also graduated from the Universidad Autónoma de Aguascalientes in the BA of English Language Teaching. And to complement the study, 10 students of their groups, intermediate groups from level 6 and 7, from ages to 14 to 17 years old, took also part of the study to get their opinions and their perceptions of the language. The procedure of the data analysis is comparing and analyzing the different teachers that were supposed to be part of the study, analyzing their experience, their factors, their age, their use of the material. After that, I talked to them and I explained an overall general idea of the study so they would know what to expect from me during the observation of the classes, who was the next step of the procedure and data analysis. After that, with the observation sheets, I organized a guided interview with the teachers where I used base questions. Depending on the answers of the base questions, I created a personalized interview in that exact moment where I was digging into more details of the class. After that, I reached out to some students, and the ones who agreed to participate in the study were part of the same process where the base questions took part and the personalized interviews started. The results and discussions, I parted in three: the role of the listening skill for students and teachers, the perception of authentic videos in EFL classrooms, and the use of authentic videos to promote listening skill. In the role of the listening skill for students and teachers, teacher A and teacher B agreed that listening was indeed a very important part of the learning process. Teacher A stated that listening, at least for me, is the beginning of learning a new language. Listening is the first encounter with a language, and for a long time, this skill is the only thing that students find confident to be part of. The other teacher agreed and said that students take part only at the early stages of the listening part because they don't feel comfortable with speaking or with writing because they feel afraid to participate in these other skills. As an evidence of what the teachers were saying, we have that the listening plays the role of a highly necessary part in language learning, since the specific skill supplies the learning with the required input, and learners cannot obtain the necessary abilities to learn a new language without the comprehension of the initial input. In the role listening skill for the students, all of them agreed, most of them agreed that listening took part as an important role of their learning process because they feel comfortable while experiencing, and they feel comfortable while going through this first before going through listening, before going through speaking or any other skill. Out of 8 students out of 10 expressed that they felt that listening took part as a relevant role in their learning process. The second part of the results and discussion, we have the perception of authentic videos in EFL classrooms. Teacher A and teacher B stated that using authentic videos in EFL classroom gave the class a different feeling. Teacher B stated that authentic videos provide the students with what the name says, authenticity. It is real usage of the language. The students will not be around English-speaking countries talking like a textbook because it is not natural. Both of them stated that it is authentic material for a reason because it is authentic and it is real and it is used by native speakers, which is the main goal of most of the learners. To provide an evidence of what they said, authenticity videos bring the real world into the classroom and help the students to contextualize language in a natural manner and enables learners to experience authentic language. And 11 participants out of 12 that took part of this study had positive thoughts and perceptions over the use of authentic videos in the classroom. In the use of authentic videos to promote the listening skill, teacher A and teacher B stated that it was necessary to use, not necessary, but it was important to use the authentic videos to provide the students with a real learning environment for the students, not only fake or made up information to study. At the end of the results, all of the participants stated that they have a positive perception of the use of authentic videos to promote the listening skill, and they thought that using these authentic videos allowed them to take part of something different than any other English classes that they had. To conclude, we can agree that all of the participants felt more confident with the usage of authentic videos during these early stages of their learning process because it provided and it felt like it was something more natural, not something that it had a long of time that had a lot of time being that way, and they expressed that the authentic videos made them feel more comfortable and made the learning process easier for them. And that's it. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Jose. All right, the first thing I'll say here is when you conclude your presentation, thank the audience, thank the examiners for listening. Thank them for their attention, and then segue into asking them if they have any questions at this time. Okay, that'll be a good segue into, and I would avoid just saying, oh, that's it, or, I just try to segue into that, and then they'll begin with their questions.
Yes.
So, all right, let's take a look here. The first thing is the time. And I feel like you need to spend less time on the theory and more time for the results. Okay, so you spoke about 13 minutes on the theory when you need to try to get it down to about 8 minutes, more or less. I would say 7 to 8 minutes is a good amount of time to speak about the theory. 2 to 3 minutes for the method, and then about 10 minutes for the results. So can we go to your title slide, please? All right. By the way, I liked how you jumped around the slide there. How did you do that?
You go to, I don't know how to say it, but it's guion bajo or guion. You just press it and it goes like that.
The underscore. Okay. All right, that's good. And that's for anyone who's watching this. I would maybe even, I might even post something. You just hit an underscore on your keyboard?
Yes, not like shift and underscore, only like the guion.
Okay. All right. So for anyone who's watching this video, I think that's a very good tool because a lot of times it takes a while to go back to all the slides. And so that's a good tip. And always make sure and speaking to everyone, to keep your presentation up when you finish, right? So a lot of times the examiners will ask, they may ask you to go to a certain slide. So, all right. So this slide looks fine. I think I would remove the ST, just put June 1, comma 2021. Even though we say June 1st, we can just remove the ordinal there. And okay, that looks good. Now in the next slide, the problem and the purpose, what I would suggest is only include one slide. Basically what you have here is, I think, enough. And then you can talk about the purpose without having a slide. And that's number one. So let's limit the slide to one. You talk about both the problem and the purpose. Try to limit that to about 30 to 40 seconds. Okay, you spoke over 2 minutes in the purpose and the problem. So we want to get right to the theory. It's important to mention the problem, and it's important to mention the purpose, but quick. I see 30 seconds, and then get right into the theory. Now, I would suggest not using any title slides. I think you had a title slide to introduce your literature review, and I think you had a title slide to introduce the results in the discussion. Mm-hmm. I would suggest removing those, okay, in your presentation. Of course, you can segue, you can transition from the purpose to the literature, from the method section to the results. Now I'm going to present my findings, right? You can say those things. And it's important that you do that, but I don't feel that you need a separate slide, because in reality, we look at this for about, 2 seconds, and then we go on to the next. So that's just one thing I think we don't need in the actual presentation. So let's go to the next slide, please. All right. In general, first of all, you do a very good job of talking and speaking, and I feel like you have a good handle of these concepts. Okay. So that's good. I think most of my feedback relates to the actual slides themselves, okay? The appearance and what to include and maybe what not to include. In general, I would suggest that you include less text in your PowerPoint presentation in the theory. Maybe keywords. I'm a big fan of using SmartArt. SmartArt is a nice feature in PowerPoint that allows you and almost forces you to use less text, but it offers a nice visual and showing different relationships. And that's what your job is here in the theory, is to give us some concepts from other authors, from other researchers, and you have to make sense of that. Now, what does that mean? So to make sense of something means to show relationships. Does one cause something else? Compare and contrast certain ideas. Show examples, very specific examples. There were some slides where you could have given a few more examples of, for example, authentic materials, or even teaching materials, right, that are authentic. And so try to be more specific. Think examples and details. Think of relationships. How can you connect these ideas from one slide to the next? Make sure that each slide sends a message. Make sure that you're communicating that message in a good heading along the top of your slide. Now, there are a couple of times in your theory where I thought maybe the order of the information or ideas, well, it wasn't, I got sidetracked, or I may be confused. So let's look at this example and compare this slide now with the next slide. Now, in this slide, I really like this automatically because there's less text, there's a visual, and maybe you could offer a little bit more in the heading, right, to add to whatever it is that you want to say here. But I like this slide for those reasons. Now, my question is, think of, you've got this concept of authentic material, and then the prior slide has said authentic material and teaching materials. So think about what exactly you're trying to say here. What would be first? And I always go back to the question words. Okay, whatever concept that you want to talk about. Think about the what, usually the what, the how, and the why. Those are usually the three question words. Of course, you might talk about the when or with whom or there are other question words, but think about first, okay, what do I want to say about authentic material? And when you think about the what, think about specific examples. Now, you did kind of define authentic material, but I would be super explicit. I would say, okay, for the purposes of this study, authentic material is defined as blah, 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 blah. Just be really, throw it out there, the definitions. And this goes for any key term that you think needs a definition. And I think certainly this one is one of those cases. Now, notice in the slide, you don't have a citation. Every slide in your theory needs to have a citation, because everything that you're talking about in the theory needs to come from an outside source. So don't make it sound at any point that you're offering an opinion. This is just your ability to say what others have to say about the concepts that you're sharing. So always keep that in mind in your theory. When you get to your results and your method, okay, that's all about your study. Okay, that's different. But in the theory, just synthesize, make sense out of this other information that the authors have researched or mentioned. All right. So a couple of things with these two slides. Think very carefully about what exactly do you want to say in these two slides? What's the order in which you should present these ideas? Show examples, describe or define these terms, and then describe how or why. Move from if you think, okay, first I'm going to define it, and then I'm going to talk about why this is important, and then I'm going to talk about how this is important. Okay, then do that, right? Think about that order as you're moving from slide to slide. I feel like that this will help you organize a little bit better the ideas. And when you go back and listen to your presentation, just ask yourself, okay, at any moment, am I talking about the what? Am I talking about the how? Am I talking about the why? And then am I presenting those ideas in an organizational, logical way for someone else to understand the information? Okay. Mm-hmm. Try to stay in the third person. I think one time you said, we can agree that, all right. So, and I think another time you said you, like, well, you can do this, right? Where you're like an imperative. So, try to stay in the third person. Yeah. Just remind yourself, okay, I got to stay in the third person. I'm going to talk about what others have said only, and I'm going to try to compare and contrast, or talk about what comes first. Maybe one idea is general. Now you're going to be more specific. Just think about certain logical patterns that best fit what you're trying to do here. Mm-hmm. Try to avoid, as a general rule, I tell this to everyone in the theory, try to avoid copying and pasting anything from your text. That's a pretty good rule of thumb to force you to just put in the words, the text that best communicate what you have to say. Remember that when we see long strings of text, we have two options as the audience. We can either listen to you or we can read the text, but seldom can we do both at the same time. Personally, when I see a lot of text in a PowerPoint, I don't even read it. I just listen. Okay, I'm not going to read that. I'm going to listen. Now, if whatever the person's saying is not clear, then I'm going to try to struggle back and forth between reading and listening, and it's hard to do. All right. So keep the text at a minimum in the theory. Mm-hmm. And again, you're delivering it just fine. This is more about preparing, but using less text, and try to avoid reading phrases or sentences at all. Just as a general rule, just don't go down that road. Just look at the slide, look at the heading and say, okay, now I'm going to talk about 30 seconds, 40 seconds or whatever about this idea. Then move to the next slide. Okay. Think of it like a big note card. Okay. When you're presenting. Okay. Now the research questions. Everything else I want to talk about almost relates to the research questions. All right. So let's go to the research questions. Clicking underscore. Awesome. That's a great tip. All right. So here we have research questions. How do English language does English language teaching, how do English language teachers use authentic videos? I'd maybe double check that. Your third question. Can you go to your theory where you answer, do you show what's one way that I guess a teacher uses authentic videos to promote the listening skill? Can you go to your slides in your theory? What's one way?
Maybe this.
Yeah. So if I just ask you, based on the theory, what's one way that teachers use authentic videos?
No, I see it now.
Yeah. And I'm going to ask you to do the same in the results, right? And you don't have to do it now, but notice what I'm doing, and this is for everyone. And I included a link. I uploaded a page yesterday, a post with I think it's an audio actually, where I talk about this. Your job in this presentation is simply to do one thing, and that's to answer your research questions. Now, you need to answer those research questions in two different ways. You need to answer it in the theory, in the sense that you need to relate the theory, whatever you're going to talk about there, needs to answer the research questions, just like what we're doing here. And obviously in the results and discussion section, you need to go back and say, okay, how do teachers use videos or authentic videos to promote listening? What's one way? What's another way? What's another way? Am I saying that in my results and discussion section? Because this is the very first thing that the examiners are going to read. When they look at your thesis statement or your thesis paper, right, and they're preparing for the oral defense, right, they're going to be looking at your paper before you present. The very first thing they're going to look at, I can guarantee this, the very first thing they're going to read, they're not going to start with the introduction. They're not going to read the abstract. They're not going to read the conclusion. What are they going to read? They're going to read the research questions. That's the very first thing. They're going to go right in the middle of the text. They're going to look for them, first of all, to see that you have them. And they're going to say, okay, these are the research questions. Then they might start with the theory and read the theory to see how relevant it is. And then, of course, they'll read the rest of the paper. When they listen to you, and they're listening to from the very beginning to the very end, they've already have in their mind from the very beginning, before you start with your first word, they know what the research questions are. Mm-hmm. So they're just asking themselves, they're reminding themselves as they're listening to you, research questions, research questions, research questions, right? And at the end of the presentation, they might ask you, okay, so how do English language teachers use authentic videos to promote listening? Can you show me a slide, just like I'm doing here, right? So check your thesis paper again, check your PowerPoint. Prepare yourself for those questions that relate directly to your research questions, both in terms of your theory and your results and discussion. Finally, the last thing I'll say is use pseudonyms, okay? So in your method section, when you talk about your participants, establish the pseudonyms. Tell us what the pseudonyms are for the participants, and then use those pseudonyms when you present your results and discussion. Now, in the students, there were some slides where you had several students answering. You had like several quotes, and, be selective. Be selective in the quotes that you use and for what purpose and for what slide. And you don't want to get the impression that we don't want to experience information overload, right? And so your job is to be very selective and just introduce this data in a way that is logical, but that doesn't overwhelm both you, the speaker, and the audience. So try to use an ellipsis. That's a way we can omit certain words that are less important. We can, of course, highlight or put in bold some text to help you in the moment that you're describing these. Remember, your job is to compare and contrast these different data sources. So that's one thing. And the second is try to triangulate a little bit more. Try to bring in maybe a graphic with the quotes a little bit tighter, a little bit closer together in your presentation so that you describe and you bring together more data sources before you offer an analysis. I think the first time you did the evidence in the results in the discussion, you had a separate slide with your discussion. And most of the time that's not really necessary. I mean, you just talk about it. You can discuss it without, in many cases, even needing a slide. You may not need a slide. All right. So just make sure you're triangulating a lot. Make sure you're answering your research questions. And in this case, I think you need to spend a lot more time in your, you need to allow for more time for those results. Again, try to shoot for about 10 minutes for answering your research questions. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Very good, Jose. Thank you.
Thank you, teacher.
Okay, Sophia, you're up.
Yes, I'm here. Can you see the screen?
Yes, whenever you're ready.
Okay. Okay. Wait. Mm. Okay. Good morning. My name is Ana Sofia Muro, and my topic is the use of gaming in online lessons for introducing and recycling vocabulary to young children. Well, to begin with, well, I also separate the problem of the study. And as it says here, vocabulary learning is commonly perceived as a boring topic by learners, particularly by young learners who belong to the digital age. So, as it says here, what new generations need are that the use of technological tools in their, especially in their online classes, in order to create an effective and efficient lesson. It is necessary to implement and employ teaching tools that help them to encourage and feel interested in the class. So the purpose of this study is that the implementation of online games can be used as a teaching tool in order to sustain their interest, help them experience the language and absorb vocabulary items more rapidly and more efficiently. So that it's that, as I said, the aim of the study is to provide the benefits that online gaming gives to teachers and learners, especially when they are young, when they are always interacting with video games and that kind of devices that they are already familiar with. I, I. Okay, then to start with the literature review, my first subheading is online teaching and learning. Well, online learning explores and requires instructional methodologies or techniques, learning tools, and unique environments within a learning program. That is that teachers must adapt their lesson plans, their planning to this new kind of modality. and it's a kind of challenge not only for teachers but also for learners, since they must adapt they must adapt teaching strategies, techniques, methodologies, approaches, and learners also must adapt like their interest, um, um, like the kind of language acquisition. Um, then for the next one, online games for teaching purposes. Well, using video games in classes or lessons provide opportunities to associate knowledge with an activity firmly embedded, both emotionally and socially, among children and adolescents. So that is to say that um, using video games, platforms, websites, or online visuals that help students to reinforce their knowledge, um, create like a nice, well, an effective and meaningful again setting of the class. So that means that when teachers start employing online gaming during their lessons, children start feeling attached to the topic, and they start having an active participation, and it improves their language production and practice. They are start interacting among their classmates and among the teacher. So what online gaming provides to classes is like that kind of cooperative and that cooperative kind of activity. And then let's move on to this one, and teaching vocabulary items by using online games in ES lessons. Teaching vocabulary through games is considered as a new tendency to enhance and increase learners' skills in English. So that is that when the online games are used by teachers as a tool, or as as a tool, kids start like feeling attracted by the visuals that the game has. So that's why the game has to contain attractive features and characteristics that can be like kind of colorful for the kids. So if the games are kind of challenging for kids, they feel more interested and motivated to continue playing. If they are in teams, if they are individually, they wanna keep participating because they think that they are winning something, that they are winning points, or they are winning something that can help them to participate during the production and practice of the lesson. And then the next one is implementing online games for introducing new vocabulary. So using games in classes provide opportunities to associate knowledge. That's the same. Okay, so this one, when children, young students, said the first time new vocabulary words or items, they they have to receive that kind of visuals by the teacher. They have to not only to get the meaning or the definition, the spelling. They have to relate that item or that word with something that they already know. It means if the teacher is teaching animals for the first time, they have to include visuals, the animals, the picture of the animals, and but the the vocabulary must like include kind of colorful things. And so the role of the online games for introducing new vocabulary items is like to practice and to recognize the meaning, the words, the use of these vocabulary words, and then implementing online games for recycling and practicing vocabulary. Employing games and activities to practice vocabulary and recycling words seemed the learner's ability to memorize the vocabulary words had become more efficient. That means that during the production and practice of the recycling words, um, um, the the games have to contain features that um, help them to recall these words previously seen. So that's why teachers must adapt their websites or the platforms or apps that they are going to use. The adaptation of the games is so important when using online gaming for teaching purposes or for vocabulary lessons. Teachers must continue the sequence of the class. So that's why the game must be adapted. And if the teacher is using a specific context, the game can follow the same context, or at least have the same items that the main practice, well, the main part of the class has. And then, well, the procedure and data analysis. Well, what I follow, well, these are the steps that I followed in order to gather the information about the participants. So the first thing that I did is to choose the student's profile. Well, starting with this study, I had to think about the academic level of the students, if they're going to be in primary school, if they had to have a basic or intermediate level. So I also contacted possible participants, and after having the participants, they had in common that they work with young children, preschool children. So after having these two participants, I designed a teacher questionnaire and providing the participants. This questionnaire has some questions about their purpose of the questions, where it was to get the information about the participants, their teaching experience, if they had a degree on teaching English, and then after having the answers of these questionnaires, I observed the vocabulary classes. I started observing these lessons, and I needed an observation sheet, so I could detect if the teachers had or followed the things that I need for the study. And then I had semi-structured interview, Polak guide interview, that break as a recall statement, where, well, this semi-structured interview was individually, so they had to, well, in this interview they shared the participants shared like their main ideas and information regarding teaching vocabulary. I asked them about the steps they followed during the class. I asked them also why they include this, I don't know, this game instead of the other one. And well, we had like a kind of semi-structured interview conversation, a guide conversation. And after having or gathered this information, I had the analysis of the data collected. So I could see if the classes that I observed work for the study, if their answers work for the study, and it was kind of different as I expected. And well, the research questions were: how do language teachers implement online games to presenting vocabulary? How do language teachers implement online games to recite vocabulary? And why may online games be employed when recycle vocabulary? And why may online games be employed when present vocabulary? So these four questions contain the same, but two of them are focused only on presenting or introducing new vocabulary, and the two others are focused or based on recycling vocabulary. And then the participants, here I have teacher A and teacher B. Teacher A works in a public kindergarten school. He had more than 5 years working with young children, so they have a wide experience working with preschool kids. And teacher B works in a private English institute, and he has less than 2 years working with young children. So that means that teacher A had more experience working with preschool and with more kids with huge with amount of kids. And teacher B, since it's a private English institute, he mentioned that he worked only with a few amount of kids, and well, both of them are male and they are in their 20s. And well, then for the results and discussion, well, the first one is online gaming implementation to introduce new vocabulary. Well, teacher A and teacher B had a different opinion about online gaming for introducing vocabulary. Teacher B stated that he could use online gaming for introducing vocabulary as long as the games are customizable and teacher can adapt them to the vocabulary lesson. On the other hand, teacher A says that he doesn't usually use online tools when he's introducing new vocabulary as the first time. He uses flashcards, PowerPoint presentations, and that kind of things that are not regarding to the online gaming. And then, well, here we have two figures, and teacher A says that yes, he kind of like employing online gaming for vocabulary lessons, for introducing vocabulary lesson. And teacher B here had a mistake. He definitely doesn't like at all to implement or employ online gaming for introducing vocabulary words. He would rather, as I said, using flashcards of that kind of even physical movement or different things. It's like he will use online gaming as the last result when introducing vocabulary. And then here we have the possible ways and factors to implement online games for introducing vocabulary. Teacher A said that in my experience, all the games in classes are for producing language skills. You can use games for presenting new things. That's a rule, the aim of the game, even if it's in an online lesson. So, as we saw previously, he doesn't like at all implementing online gaming. For the first time, produce vocabulary words. And then teacher B thinks that if the game has some features and options that the teacher can modify, it may work to introduce vocabulary. So that is that if whether the game can be adapted and adapted but like efficiently, teacher B can use gaming for introducing vocabulary words or vocabulary items. He also mentioned that he have never used online gaming for introducing vocabulary items, but he would like to do it. Maybe it's not his first option, but it's not that definitely not. And then possible ways and factors.
Thank you. Sorry to interrupt, Sophia. Thank you. Just to give you an idea, this is basically 20 minutes. The first thing, if you can go ahead and leave up your presentation. Yeah, whenever you finish, make sure you leave up your presentation, and I would check out, I'm going to check this out too, this underscore. I love that. That's going to be awesome. Use that. All right. Be prepared to jump around your presentation. Don't close it. Don't put it in the edit mode. Just keep it up wherever you have it. Make sure at the end you have your references. Maybe I don't know if you have it there, yes, but to make sure you have your references. I would have a closing slide. Maybe you have it already, thanking them for their attention. And then when when you're practicing your presentation, practice knowing how to start and how to conclude. When you conclude, you want to thank them, and then segue or have a transition into a question and answer. So you could say something like, "Thank you for your attention. I'm happy to answer any questions at this time." All right, now I want to talk first about organization. Well, let me talk first about timing. So you spoke about almost 11 minutes in the theory. Try to narrow that down to about 7 to 8 minutes. All right, so that allows more time for the results and discussion. You need a lot more time in the results and discussion. Try to speak less about the method. Try to speak about 2 minutes, really. 2 to 3, even 3 minutes is kind of a long time. I would try to get even closer to 2 minutes to talk about everything you need to talk about as it relates to your method section, your participants, your instruments, your procedure, and your data analysis. You need to talk about all 4 things in that section in about 2 minutes. Okay, so practice. I don't know how much time you've had or how many times you've been able to practice your presentation, but just keep practicing it until you feel comfortable. we all get nervous when we speak. It's a natural thing, right? It's not natural to speak in front of people. So we all get nervous. Just try to relax. And I want you to, you're going to feel nervous. We all feel nervous. So try to find ways for you to not look nervous. Okay. So one way to do that is, make sure you're taking deep breaths, slow down, have a glass of water next to you. If you have to pause for a second and take a glass of water, if your throat gets dry, but just relax. And if you get to a point where you get flustered and you're not sure what to say, just relax, stop, just pause, just stop. But try not to make any other kind of facial movements or say something just relax, stop, and start again. And that's much better than anything else that you could do, right? To show your nervousness. Just try to practice not looking nervous. And if you keep doing that, your body's going to tell you psychologically you're going to be less nervous. Okay. That's just a fact, right? So the nerves are good, right? Because it forces us to do our best job, but I don't want them, they shouldn't interfere with your performance. Okay. So it just takes practice. Relax. You still have plenty of time to go over this. All right. So I want to talk about organization, order. So think about, in fact, let me ask you, like in your presentation, you started first with a slide that was called procedure and data analysis. And then, if I'm not mistaken, you presented your research questions and then your participants. Think about your paper. Of those things I just mentioned, what did you present first? What was the order that you followed in your thesis paper? Do you remember?
It was first the research questions and then the participants and the
Yep. So I would do the same thing. Okay. I would do the same thing. Follow the same order. The research questions right after the theory, segue into the research questions, then present a slide for your participants, then present your slide for your procedure and data analysis, your procedure, your instruments, procedure. I would have a slide much like what you have. Procedure, and actually I would change that. I'm sorry. I would have the slide, I would have the title, Instruments and Procedure. And then you talk about the instruments, the procedure, and the data analysis. I don't think it's necessary to have all of that in the heading. Just say instruments and the procedure in the heading, and then talk about those three in one slide like you did. The only thing I would say is get through it, practice. It's a lot of stuff, right? There's a lot of information in those 2 minutes. So just practice getting it out there, right? In that time frame. Make sure also in the participant slide that you establish your pseudonyms. It's very important, I think, to personalize your participants, especially your teachers. Give us a name, a fake name, of course, to protect their confidentiality, but tell us what those names are in the participant slide. This is Chris. Chris teaches at a public high school, blah, 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 blah. This is Susan. Exactly. This is Susan. She teaches at a private English institute. She has less than 2 years working with children, right? So you just tell us who Susan is. And then when you present your results, it's Susan this, Susan said this, Susan said that. I observed Susan and she said this. She did this in class. Okay. So it kind of personalizes your study.
But teacher, if I use teacher A and teacher B in the paper, I can change the name here in the presentation?
All right. What I would do for this reason, because what I would do in this case is I would go ahead and set up pseudonyms, but then say in the paper, Susan is Susan B. and Chris refers to teacher A, but say that once in the participants and then Susan and Chris, or whatever names of course that you want to use. All right.
Okay. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, that way it'll just tell the examiners that that you're using a pseudonym here, that you didn't use it in your paper.
Yes.
All right. The rest of what I have to say really relates to what I was talking with Jose about, and that is making sure that you're answering your research questions. All right. Now, your research questions are talking about vocabulary, both introducing new vocabulary and recycling vocabulary, and online games. And again, don't neglect the what. Don't neglect examples. So it would be really good to include very specific examples in your theory. Like what are some games? Now, maybe these games are not the exact same games that you saw in your own study. That's okay. What you're looking for are principles, like showing us examples of those games and you talking about the principles of those, like the engagement. You talk a lot about, having games be engaging and other concepts that relate to games, but give us some examples. Okay. So make sure in your theory that you have examples. Now, some of those examples when it comes to games may relate, maybe those studies were very much related to both vocabulary and the use of games, or maybe not. Maybe you have some studies that have some examples of games, other examples of learning new vocabulary or recycling vocabulary. But in your discussion, you're connecting those two concepts. All right. So it doesn't matter if a study happens to be only about one or the other, but at the end, your job in the theory is to connect the dots, is to connect those ideas, those studies, so that we see, okay, there's plenty of examples. I understand through examples what that looks like, both in terms of the game and in terms of recycling and bringing in new vocabulary. Be careful here in your study, because you've got two research questions that relate to two different ways of learning vocabulary. So keep that straight in your theory. Maybe you have one slide that's about recycling first or second, whatever, it doesn't matter. And then another slide or a series of slides that talk about new vocabulary. And then you bring in games that are most suited or most useful for those two types of scenarios. Maybe the games are similar, maybe the games are not. You tell us, right? Because you can expect questions about that. Okay, so at the end of the day here, so what do you suggest here? What's the difference between recycling and learning new vocabulary as it relates to online games? Think about that question, that overall question, and make sure that you're answering that overall question right in your theory, as well as you're addressing it in your study. Now, maybe you didn't observe certain aspects. That's okay, right? That what you're looking for and what we're expecting is for you to tell us, show us first your results. And then in your interpretation, your discussion, you're going to say, okay, this was the difference, right? They used this kind of game, and this was an example of recycling, and it was different than this, and then you compare that with the theory. Make sure in your results, right? Go back to these research questions. I would write the research questions off to the side on a piece of paper, and then go into your results and say, okay, first question, how do language teachers implement online games? All right, where's that first slide? Where's the slide in my results and discussion that show how? Do you have some examples? What's one example? What kind of game was it? Tell us the game or games that you saw in your direct classroom observations. Maybe you talked about it in an interview. Maybe the teacher mentioned it in a questionnaire. Maybe the teacher said something very specific in class from your classroom observations that you can bring out as a quote, right? Depending on your data sources, depending on the types of information that you collected for your data, show us an example. How is it? That's the question. How do language teachers implement it? Show us at least one way, right? And I know that you have here plural. How do teachers implement online games? At least give us one example. Maybe you have more than one example, but think about how you can organize your ideas, your answer, triangulating the information, bringing together different data sources, and then offering a discussion. And remember, and this is also, Jose, for you as well, make sure that you are comparing and contrasting the theory, right, in your discussion, in your results and discussion, right? You're saying, okay, this was similar to this other game, or it was different than the other game, right? And or it was a different reason for using games, right? The teacher that I observed gave me this reason, when the experts say there's another reason. It's all good, but you have to connect the dots. You have to tell us it's either similar or different than your theory. All right. So remember, the research questions are the heartbeat of your theory. It's the heart. It's the center. Everything evolves or revolves around those questions, both in terms of the theory and also the results. Okay. Does that make sense?
Yes.
All right. Let's see. Yeah. If you detect a mistake in your PowerPoint, first of all, double check, right? Double check your spelling and all these little things. But at the time you're presenting, forget it. Don't worry about it. Don't say it, right? Just, don't mention it. If you happen to see a mistake, you don't have to, it's better just not to say anything.
Okay.
You try to avoid like where you say, here are two charts. Don't tell. And okay, now the next slide, try to avoid those, your job, think of it like you're telling a story. Okay. The PowerPoint presentation is simply big note cards. Okay. That's all it is. They're note cards for you, the speaker, to make sense, to flow, to connect ideas from one to the next, to transition. So work on those transitions. Imagine we're not even looking at it, PowerPoint. We're just listening to you, right? Don't say the next slide. Now, in the next slide, no, just go into the next. Go to the next slide, and you just keep the train of thought, right? And keep it going. The last thing I'll mention is very kind of a mechanics type of thing, but I think it is important. Can you go to one of your slides? There was a slide in your results and discussion section that you used an ellipsis and you used brackets. And Jose, this also I think might be helpful for you when you have really long quotes. There are two ways that you can reduce a lengthy quote for the purposes of really bringing out the key points. And number one, you can use an ellipsis. That's 3 dots, ... Or you can use brackets. Now, when do you use both? Well, the ellipsis simply means the omission of words. I mean, that's why we use an ellipsis. It's when we're saying in the context of a direct quote that we're leaving out certain words because they're not as important. And I highly recommend that you do that when the words in the quote really don't add value to the key point that you're trying to make for that particular slide. Remember, each slide should represent a key point that's communicated in the heading at the top. This is not the slide I was thinking about. There's one slide where you had an ellipsis with 3 points.
Yes, with them.
And a bracket. You had, I don't know, it was like the 3rd or 4th slide in your results. I don't remember exactly.
This one. Sorry.
No, next slide.
No.
There it is. All right, notice where you say, in my experience, all the games and classes are for producing language skills. And then you have ... an ellipsis, and then you also have brackets. All right, so an ellipsis is when you want to omit words. A bracket is when you want to insert certain words. Let's say the speaker, your participant, used a grammatically incorrect structure. Okay. And that happens to all of us, right? We're talking and we misspeak, or we say something that's just not clear, doesn't make sense, or it's just not the best way to articulate it. Okay. You, as the researcher, you can use a bracket to first get rid of the words that were unclear or grammatically incorrect or whatever. And then within the brackets, you insert words that keep the idea that essentially correct the speaker. So what this tells us is, okay, you're inserting your own words as the writer, and you're continuing the idea based on the word for word direct quote. Okay. So with brackets, we insert words. In ellipsis, we omit words. And they both can be used, but we don't use them together. We don't use them together. So in this case, if I think you're just meaning to use an ellipsis. So you would say producing language skills, ... and then continue this sentence. All right. Now, so if this is the next sentence, you can't use games. That's fine, right? That would mean that you're basically omitting the words at the end of this first sentence, and then you're starting a second sentence. You can't use games for presenting new things. All right. So just try not to use both. I would remove the brackets in this case. But go back to all of your quotes. And Jose, I know maybe in your case, you could do the same. See if there are opportunities for you to omit certain words. Be very selective in what you include. Only give us the highlights, right? Only give us the highlights. Just because you have it doesn't mean you necessarily should present it. This is just the key points that you want to include as it relates to your heading for that particular slide. Okay. All right. I think be careful also with the pronunciation. Questionnaire. Practice saying that out loud over and over and over until you feel very comfortable with the pronunciation of questionnaire. All right. I think that's all I have. Do you guys have any questions? Anything that we talked about here today? Not clear? Any questions overall? Maybe something we haven't talked about?
No, everything is okay.
Sophia, what do you think? Any other questions?
Not yet.
All right. All right, guys. Well, I am recording today's session in about, usually takes me a couple of hours. It takes a little time to produce or basically cut out some parts of it and upload it to our playlist. But I will have this in the afternoon so that if you need, in fact, I would highly recommend that you go back and watch your performance. If it's necessary, listen to our feedback, our discussions that we've had today. I've also uploaded notes in the PLC notebook in Microsoft Teams. So I keep my notes there. So if that's helpful, take a look at those. I think we've talked about most of what I included. And of course, if you have any other questions, reach out to me before now and your final presentation. Okay, we've basically completed the thesis paper. Make sure that there are, for better or for worse, don't make any changes to your research questions. Those should be exactly the same as your thesis paper. And also the title. Make sure the title of your presentation is exactly word for word the same title as you have it in your thesis paper. I think those are the main two things that should be exactly the same. Now, the headings and the way that you organize doesn't necessarily have to be exactly like you have it in your paper. Okay, this is a different way of delivering your study. And you're not going to be able to talk about everything in your thesis paper. And you might find it useful to change the order in which you present your ideas. But do make sure, of course, that you're talking about ideas that are coming directly from your thesis paper. Okie dokie.
Okay.
Right. If there are no more questions, guys, then we'll stop there for today. I think we have one more session. If it helps, again, I recommend everyone to observe as much as you feel you need to until you feel that you can anticipate the types of feedback that I say, right? And, I repeat a lot of the same types of concepts and feedback, right? And so I think it's worth listening to that over and over, and maybe even seeing different contexts, maybe even seeing different examples of some of your classmates, and maybe they do something that you want to do in terms of the organization or just the appearance. Again, I'm a big fan of smart art in terms of the theory, especially, but even the results and discussion to offer a little bit of some visual relationships that I think help. So take a look at that. And yeah, I think we'll stop there then. All right. Thanks, guys. Have a good day. And
Thank you, teacher.
we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you. You
Thank
too.
you.
Bye.
Bye. Have a great day. Bye.
Thank you. You too.
Bye.